So the other day, I was scrolling through my online woodworking community, and I noticed that everyone has started making these really festive holiday trees. But one thing that struck me as odd was the amount of frustration that everyone was having because of complex angles and having a hard time assembling them. So in this WoodStory, I'm going to show you how you can make this beautiful and fun holiday tree using just one angle. And I'm also going to show you how to put together a really quick jig that's going to allow you to assemble it in minutes. So grab your tools and join me for this WoodStory. So this board that I'm going to be working with is 5 feet long and it is just over 5 inches wide. And that's going to give me 2 Christmas trees. This one is only about 1/2 inch. You can use thicker wood as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it down in the middle first. And then I'm also just going to cut off the sides because that's going to clean up both ends and that's going to look nicer when it's done. And you can use pressure treated wood. You can use regular pine. You can really use any kind of wood. There's no rules. Just make sure your wood is nice and flat. If you're the type of person who likes to have the plans in your hands, then go ahead and grab them from my website via the link below in the description. So these trees consist of 8 different pieces that need to be cut with a 30-degree angle. And it may look a little complex when you first see it, but let me walk you through it and I think you'll find it a lot easier. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different pieces in this tree. And they're all cut with 30-degree angles. We have 4 pieces that are exactly the same, and they are going to have a miter cut that looks like this. Where if you're noting, this angle and this one is the same. And we're going to need 4 of those. And in our case, we're going to make those 6 inches long. Now we're also going to need another 4 pieces, and they're all going to be different. And their miter is going to also be 30 degrees. However, there is a difference. They are going to look like this, where the length is in the bottom. And when we're measuring, we are measuring from here to here. And when we're measuring the bottom, we are measuring from here to here. So when I say 6 inches, this is your measurement. And for these ones, they're going to have different measurements, but you're going to be measuring from the bottom. So the first one is going to be 6.5 inches, and you're going to need 1 of those. The next one is going to be 5.8. Then you're also going to need 1 of those. Third one is going to be 11.25, and you're going to need 1 of those. And the last piece is going to be 3.5 inches, so all inches, and you're going to need 1 of those. And to put this into perspective here, so these ones that are 6 inches, that is this one, this one, this one, and this one. This all represents these ones. And for the other pieces, your 6.5 piece, this one is going to be your 6.5 inch piece. This one is your 5.8 piece. This one is your 11.25 piece. And this one is your 3.5 inch piece. So keep that in mind as we go through it on the miter saw. We're going to need 4 of the exact same ones, and then we're going to need 4 of the same angled pieces but with different measurements. I'm starting by making a 30-degree angled cut at the end without needing to measure. And once this initial cut is made, I can measure out the 6 inches that I need for the first 4 pieces. And remember, we want to measure this from the long part of the angle. I'm also using a scrap piece of wood to set up a stop block. This way, I won't have to measure all 4 pieces that I need. I can just measure the first one and then make 3 repeatable cuts, which will speed up the process. This is also a great thing to do if you're planning on making a whole bunch of Christmas trees. you'll see that I'll use it a couple of times in this process. So when we're making the next cut, we want these angles to go in the same direction. We want them to go down. And bring you back to that book where we looked at it. They're going to go down, down. And we're measuring from the longest point to the longest point. So I'm going to take my measuring tape and I'm going to measure out 11¼ right here. And then I'm going to make sure that when I have this lined up here, that I am going in the right direction, which means I need to have it go this way right here. But you do want to make sure that you're not lining up your laser with the cut line here, because if you did that, it would actually end up being too short. So you need to line it up with your cut up here. Otherwise, you got to subtract that from your measurement. But I find that harder to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to line this up with my laser at the top here, and then I'm going to cut it, and that's going to give me the right cut. And then I just proceed in the same fashion with the other 3 cuts that we still needed to make. And I measure each one out as I go along. Do make sure that you keep flipping that board over so that you maintain the right angle. And if you are making multiple trees, you can set up that stop block again each time you've measured out a new piece. That way you can make multiple trees at the same time. Before assembly, I highly recommend that you sand off any refuge that the miter saw may have left behind. And one thing that you may have come to the conclusion with already when you see all these angles is that it's going to be a little bit tricky when we start to assemble them in terms of clamping them together. We want to be able to put a shape like this together, and we want to be able to clamp it pretty tight so that it's not going to come apart. And that can be tricky to do because with an angle like this, there's really nowhere for a clamp to put pressure. So I have a very simple jig that I'm going to show you how to make in basically a couple minutes. All you need is a couple of pieces of scrap wood. So let's start working on that jig now, because that's going to be really helpful when we start the actual assembly. So to make this assembly jig, all you're going to need is 3 pieces of scrap wood from the same piece of pine. The 3 at least have to be from the same piece of pine because we want the same thickness. And what we're going to do is we're going to just mark 1 inch in on both sides. Here, and do the same thing on this side. 1 inch in on both sides. And then we're going to cut a 30-degree angle here and here. And once we have these 2 cut, we're going to assemble them like this. And we're going to use our little attachment piece in the back just to screw it in to hold these 2 pieces together. It's a lot easier to cut this angle on the miter saw, which is why we're doing it this way. And then for our last piece here, you're just going to cut 2 30-degree angles like this so that we end up with a triangle, because that triangle we're going to need in here afterwards so that we have something to put pressure against when we add our funny angles in here. Let's go over and make those cuts. So when your pieces are all cut, they're going to look like this. You're going to have 1 triangle, all with 30-degree angles, and you're going to have these 2 pieces with 30-degree angles, and then we're going to have our little extra scrap connector piece. And the idea here is that we're going to find the right spot to put these together. So we're going to put it like this. Then, as an example, when we do get to those crazy angles that we have to do, we're going to put it in like this. So we're just going to do a quick test here. What I want it to be able to do is I want it to be able to go through with this little line. I don't want to put any pressure on the end, but I don't want it to go so far that it's going to go all the way through. I want it to be kind of at that happy medium. So I'm going to just make sure that it can still put pressure up against here. That looks pretty good. And then I know when my other piece comes in, it's going to put pressure on here, but I'm not going to be pushing that. And then my last triangle is going to go in like this, and that's where the clamp is going to sit. It's going to sit here and here. But right now, we're going to just make a mark of this being the spot where we want to screw it in from this side. We're going to do one little bit more of sanding before starting the assembly. And I just want to take a minute to say thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me that you're subscribing and liking and sharing this content. It means that I can continue to do what I love, which is create great content for you so that you can go out and create your own wood story. So thank you very much. So as we start assembling this, I do want to point something out, and that is the thickness of the material. So as you can see right here, this is how it's supposed to look once it's all glued up. These connecting points changes if the thickness of the wood is any different. So right now, as mentioned earlier in the video, this is about 1/2 inch. But if you're using thicker wood, then chances are you're going to be shifting things up because it's going to add to the thickness. So just something to be aware of when you're assembling your pieces. So what I like to do to avoid not having any issues at all is I will assemble these pieces first and this. Because that way, when this is assembled and when that is assembled, I can go in and I can kind of shift it a little bit here and there to make sure that it's absolutely at the right angle. Where if I started by assembling all of these, then these pieces might not properly align if I did anything wrong in these sections. So start by doing this one and this one, and then we will get to the final middle pieces afterwards. To assemble the pieces, you're going to want to use glue and a nail gun, and of course your new handy assembled jig. Now, end grain mitered joints, such as the ones we just did, are not very strong when you only assemble it with glue. And that's because the wood is extremely porous at the end. So every time you add glue to it, it just soaks it right up instead of bonding it with the other pieces. This is why you definitely want to use nails as well. You can of course also use small screws if you don't have a nail gun. But either way, the jig will ensure that your pieces stays in place as you assemble these tricky 30-degree angles. For the middle pieces, you'll want to use some clamps. You can also use painter's tape. I like to lay out all the pieces first, and then I'll add a clamp to each of the top pieces without using glue. Then I'll use glue for the bottom pieces and clamps, and then I'll go back again and add glue to the first 2 pieces that I just used the clamps for. The reason for this is that it ensures that nothing shifts around and that my spacing is maintained. To add the final piece, which is the bottom piece, just measure out the middle and you can attach it with glue and painter's tape or a clamp if you have extras. To finish off these trees, you can do a combination of things. You can either use oil or you can spray paint them, or if you are planning on keeping them outside, using a coat of spar urethane might be a good idea. And it didn't take long until these trees were done and ready to be displayed on my mantle. This was such a fun and quick project. If you'd like to see another really quick project, I recommend that you check out this pumpkin tray. And for more great content and videos, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you soon in the next Wood Story.